How do I find the domain and range when looking at a graph? Hi, I'm David. I will try to help you analyze what I just said. Sorry. Domain, range. That's what I'm looking at. If you can, try to put an enclosed box, rectangle or something around the object. If it really is an object that doesn't go forever out to infinities, in other words, it doesn't have any arrows kind of heading off to infinity, then try to think about this in an enclosed, circumscribed rectangle around the graph, or the graph is inscribed, if you remember your geometry terms. And then just analyze domain as what x to what x value. This is where the domain lives when you're looking at a graph. If it is an enclosed graph that just stops and starts in places, and it can look like this, and you can make a box around it, then that's where the domain is. For domain, you will say x is an element of, and then you're going to use interval notation. Negative pi is where it starts. I'm looking at it right here. Negative pi. And it looks like way over there it finishes at pi. So that's where I'm looking. Okay. Oh, are these parentheses or brackets? This first one didn't look very well. It's supposed to be a bracket, but that's the question we should ask. Since it is solid, this should be a bracket on this side because this dot right here is solid. If the dot was hollow anywhere, I would be using parentheses. Same thing on this side. Now let's look at the range. Let's start at the bottom, work our way up, and analyze what range of y values are being used. Y's are an element of, this is how you say it, y's are an element of the values starting, again, solid dot. I see it. It looks like it's down. I'm looking at the y values right here and right there. And so this one looks like it starts down at -1. We always start at the bottom and work our way up. Comma, that means all the infinite numbers in between. -1 up to +1, bracket. Cool? Now I got a quick question for you. What if everything was identical? What if everything was identical except there was a hole at the top where it hit the y value of 1? What if everything else was the same, right? We had solid dots down here, solid dots down there, right? I got to make that solid, make it look solid. Hang on. Cool. All right, now, what would the range be if it was going from -1 to 1? At the top, there was a hole. Well, it's almost identical. It's still solid, bracket, at -1, and it still goes all the way up to 1, but since it's a hole, it barely makes it to the edge of it and stops. And so we use a parenthesis saying you can't be there. So because there's a hole, that means we use the parentheses. So that's just, will come up in the next couple weeks. So I just want to be sure you're ready for it. Not always can you make a box. So I just want you to kind of think of the limiting values. I can put an edge on this side to say that no values go past this point. It looks like all the x's that I'm using are going to go up until that point. Those are the x's that exist on this graph. The y's look like they're on a sideways parabola, and I want to emphasize that in mathematics, once those arrows go out, we don't expect any type of major changes in the graph. It should be smooth and continuous heading out that way. So this means if you break it down into horizontal, and vertical components, it looks like this graph in the horizontal comes out of -infinity and stops at a value right there. And that value looks to be where x is 0, its origin. The y value seems to be exploding up and down as it goes out the parabola, the sideways parabola. there is still a forever up and down. So the domain is all the x's. The domain is all the x's coming out of negative infinity, but stopping at 0, and it's still a solid dot. There's no hollow dot there. Solid graph is like a solid dot. So we say it goes up to 0 and stops. Since the y looks like it just hits all values from negative infinity, from way down here out of negative infinity, it'll go up and through all the values. That's not the direction of the graph. I'm not talking about like that's the graph. The graph isn't going straight up. I am analyzing how the graph exists. It seems to exist in all the negative y values. It'll eventually hit them. And all the positive y values. All of them. So I'm going to say the range of values comes out of negative infinity with a parentheses and stops at infinity. You should never, ever, ever use a bracket with infinity. If you do, I want you to take pictures when you get there, because if you've been to infinity, that's cool. So unless you can think you can actually be at infinity, don't use a bracket. Just give you a hint, whenever you're thinking that you're at infinity, just to add one more. Yeah, you got more to go, don't you? See, it's kind of a weird thing. Anyways, I hope this helps about domain and range of graphs.